In my previous podcast, I postulated that the cosmos is not about time and space, but that it is instead all about matter becoming aware of itself through a great cosmic dance of creation, entropy, evolution, and competition, all culminating, so far, in ourselves as the most complex expression of creation and the most advanced form of consciousness of which we are now aware. In this episode, I want to explore the origins and evolution of complexity. Where did everything come from? The complexity of systems is measured by the amount of information that they contain and is sometimes defined as the shortest description of all the organized information in a system. There is a cosmological algorithm, a systematically unfolding cascade of patterns from which everything arises. It came into being 13.8 billion years ago with the Big Bang. Do not think of it as matter. Think of it rather as an algorithm, as a process of rapidly expanding and evolving patterns, unfolding according to the laws of physics. It is significant not because of its extension in time and space, but because of its propensity to evolve complex systems that have culminated, so far, in biogenesis and human consciousness. The algorithm moves from very low entropy and order at the beginning of time to high entropy and chaos at the end of time. During this journey, if the circumstances are exactly right, the process will result in the generation of complexity, resulting in the formation and destruction of first and second generation stars and the creation of increasingly complex elements and compounds. Once again, and only if the circumstances are exactly right, very complex compounds and processes will evolve in primal seas, possibly around hydrothermal vents, providing the ingredients and mechanisms for the emergence of life. Life will evolve into multicellular animals, into mammals, and ultimately into humans with cognitive consciousnesses and complex technological societies. But ultimately, according to the second law of thermodynamics, complexity must succumb to entropy, and our universe will, at the end of time, subside into heat death and total disorder. The first life emerged on Earth about 3.8 billion years ago in the form of prokaryotic bacteria and archaea. They evolved and populated the world for the following 2 billion years. In the process, they began to change the atmosphere of the planet from a mixture of carbon dioxide, methane, and hydrogen sulfide to our present nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere. They also changed the geology of the planet's superficial strata. They communicated with one another by utilizing molecules, proteins, and genetic material. So, in the absence of proof of life elsewhere, prokaryotic Earth would already have contained a great deal of the complexity and information in existence. However, there was relatively little development and change in the prokaryotic world until around 2 billion years ago, with the very unlikely emergence of eukaryotic cells, caused by an archaeon that had enveloped a bacterium, which survived the process while retaining its own mitochondrial genetic code. Eukaryotic cells were far more complex, with a mass of up to 15,000 times greater than prokaryotic cells. They included numerous and varied organelles with membranes and a nucleus with DNA containing the entire genetic code for the larger organisms of which they were part. They also accommodated up to 5,000 mitochondria, each generating ATP power with complex nanomachinery. Their ribosomes were able to produce, on direction of an exquisitely complex overarching program, the great array of extraordinarily complex proteins required by the macroorganisms of which they were part. Indeed, magnified to human scale, they would appear to be the size of great cities, crammed with factories and complex transportation systems, producing up to 1 billion coherent chemical reactions each second. So, a eukaryotic cell, invisible to the naked eye, contains more coherent information than a lifeless galaxy that spans hundreds of thousands of light years. So much for the relevance of space. Our bodies, containing some 30 to 40 trillion cells, each producing up to 1 billion chemical reactions per second, produce thousands of times more purposeful reactions per second than there have been seconds since the beginning of time 13.8 billion years ago. So much for time. Then, following the last snowball Earth period around 635 million years ago, multicellular life started to appear, spurred on by rising oxygen levels and nutrient-enriched seas. This opened the way to the Cambrian explosion around 540 million years ago, resulting in the appearance of virtually all current animal groups, including 20 to 35 new phyla. The emergence of sexual reproduction, predation, and competition between and within species led to an enormous increase in the variety and complexity of life on Earth. The competition between and within species has resulted ultimately in the evolution of more than 8 million species that occupy every nook and cranny in the biosphere and produce the remarkable variety of plant, insect, and animal species that we observe today. This includes our own species, Homo sapiens, which emerged about 300,000 years ago in Africa. As we shall discuss later, the development of complexity in human societies reached critical mass after the last ice age 12,000 years ago, with the development of agriculture and the domestication of animals. Complexity increased with the rise and fall of successive civilizations. It grew exponentially following the Industrial Revolution and the explosion of technology and information following the Second World War. Mankind now stands at the apex of technological and information complexity, possibly on the eve of the superintelligence singularity. The complexity of systems includes the complexity of all their subsystems. So, human society includes not only the innumerable interactions between its members, its systems and organization, and its store of scientific and cultural information, but the almost unfathomable and unique biological, neurological, and experiential complexity of each human being who has ever lived. We are told by Professor Sean Carroll that the nature of the everyday physical universe is comparatively simple and can be expressed in a single equation. By contrast, living organisms, the brains of higher animals, human society, and human cognitive consciousness are inexpressibly complex and would require extraordinarily long descriptions. What would the shortest description be of all the information in the woman sitting opposite you on the bus? It would have to encompass her breathtaking biological complexity, the complex structures and programs in her 30 trillion cells, the unfathomable complexity and immeasurable interactions of her brain, her nervous, parasympathetic, and lymphatic systems. It would have to unravel the sequences of her genetic code and the characteristics of her ancestors, stretching all the way back to the beginning of life. The description would have to include the vast amount of information that she has assimilated from her culture and her personal experiences. It would have to encompass all her relationships, all her thoughts, all her memories, and all her dreams. Just consider the shortest description of all the information contained in a world city like New York, London, or Shanghai. How much information would be included in the briefest possible description of contemporary human society? Far from being a tiny speck orbiting a medium-sized star in one of hundreds of billions of galaxies, life and consciousness-crammed Earth resumes its position at the center of creation, in a scheme in which a poodle puppy contains far more complexity and information than the dog star Sirius, the brightest star in the nighttime sky. In a complexity information-based cosmos, human beings resume their central and indispensable role as the generators of virtually all the cognitive consciousness of which we are now aware. In my next podcast, I shall discuss the almost infinite unlikelihood of the process that I have just described. I shall deal with the fine-tuning problem and with the disturbing possibility that as far as we are ever likely to be aware, we may be alone in the cosmos.